A key point I've tried to make on this channel is while I understand modern politics can wind you up, it's worth trying to stay calm and peaceful. This is for three simple reasons. Number one, it's just better to live this way for yourself personally. I've been the guy before who gets tanked up about all of these political issues and is desperate to speak about them and argue with other people. And I have to say, living that way made me broadly unhappy. I think there's a much better approach to this, which is good for your heart and your soul. The second main reason is that political demagogues and the modern media often want to wind you up, as it's in heightened states of emotion you can be manipulated. However, if you have a calmer disposition, you can often see through the nonsense and machinations of the modern political world and see all the more clearer. Thirdly, on a political level, the modern media likes to represent anybody who thinks outside of the mainstream globo-liberalism homo mentality as some crazy psychopath full of hate and anger. Now, while the media does distort that image, most people who think like me are completely normal as well, the reality is that as a broader movement, it pays to be calmer and wiser in the long run. It makes the normies, quote unquote, think that we might actually be saying something meaningful rather than ranting and raving. Yet I personally believe the best way to get to a wiser state around approaching politics and life is to accept its harsh truths first, and then you can make a plan on a solid foundation of what to do in the long run. Firstly, if you'd like clarification on what I mean by globalism, I've linked a video down below if you want to check that out first. But the first bitter pill to swallow is to understand that democracy at this point is virtually over. Yeah, we have relative democracy, but when it comes to the fundamental decisions of life, the globalist grand meta-narrative rules all. That combination of neoliberal economics and woke social policy is going to be very hard to break. To be blunt, Reform UK are not going to take that away. Just remember that even Liz Truss was too much for the globalist system. They had to oust her and implement a different bank manager in the name of Rishi Sunak. And remember, it wasn't the people or even the politicians that ousted Truss. It was the globalist economic elite. The ultimate conclusion here is that we are already at the end of the nation state. And this leads me to the second bitter pill. When I started this channel, one of the main motivations was I was a bit tired of reading comments such as, "We must act on mass immigration before it's too late. We must stand up to woke culture before it ruins Western civilization." Unfortunately, it's already too late, and it has been since about 1997. The truth is, it will take decades to reverse the long march through the institutions, and at this point we are in the post-national nation. Many people haven't quite noticed that yet, but by the time they do, they'll realise there are already way too many people here and too many brainwashed youngsters to make any meaningful defence against it. Now, I do hear many people on the hard right propose some sort of repatriation here, but for me that's just unrealistic. First of all, it would be way too unpopular with the masses even now, as well as being far too brutal. But perhaps most importantly, it completely misunderstands the real state we're in. We are completely at the whim of the globalist overlords. If you even tried such a policy, you'd be ousted by the US government and probably their WEF backers in an afternoon. Now, if you're still with me, well done for getting through all this negativity. But the third bitter pill is the multiculturalism angle. Yet we all know that the angelic utopia of multiculturalism is a load of nonsense. It doesn't matter how many times a black player scores a penalty for England and Liberals cheer, there are serious problems. And the multicultural idea was always crazy from the outset. There is absolutely no historical reality to point to state that this is going to work. Of course, if you say any of this or notice any of the downsides, you'll just be called a racist. That most people can't even think outside of the paradigm of globalist liberalism these days shows us that we are very, very lost as a people. Yet that isn't the bitter pill quite yet. The bitter pill isn't that multiculturalism doesn't work, it's what came before that. How did we get into a state where we thought that was a good idea? I mean, just bear in mind, no empire, no country in history has tried this ever. Yes, you've had people from different social or ethnic groups all in one country, but usually they're under the thumb of one ruling group. Now, that we could even think this was a good idea shows that our civilization had weakened to such an extent we'd lost our strong mythos at the foundation of it. A mythos is a human universal. It creates unity amongst the people, offers them spiritual growth, shared values which create a high-trust society. In essence, our mythos was chopped down by a sort of intellectual, humanist, rational scientism that itself was rooted in materialism, and materialism is now the world we live in, an individual, self-centered reality where everything is about possessions and personal gain. Now this leads us to bitter pill number 4. I was recently watching a debate where Konstantin Kissin of the Trigonometry channel was essentially having a debate against many Muslims, and most of the Muslims were stating that essentially the Western narrative doesn't exist and poo-pooing his every idea that the West is essentially positive in any way. Yet what's interesting is that while Konstantin Kissin does a good job here and makes some very good points, most of the Muslim debaters and audience aren't even interested. They even laugh at him when he says the British Empire ended slavery, which it did. This tells us something very important, and that's that rational debate isn't really going to work in these environments because both of these competing parties are talking from and to a different original foundational mythos of their civilizations. This leads us to bitter pill number 4. Most people are driven via emotional, historical, social, and even ethnic loyalty rather than pure intellectualism. It's only really an idea of the modern Enlightenment Western world that you can intellectually talk someone into a position and they will completely go with it. The reality is throughout history that people do have a lot deeper bonds than that. It doesn't mean rationality has no place, but it certainly isn't a key place. And this is the great fault of rationalist humanism, the ideology behind multiculturalism. People who subscribe to this believe you can bring anybody to the UK from Africa, from the Middle East, from Asia, and after a few years they'll just buy in totally to our way of life. But this, of course, is a great mistake. As I've said on this channel before, the multiculturalists, ironically, totally misunderstand and devalue culture. Essentially, the multicultural ideology destroys cultures by ripping away their foundational mythos and then making them all obey the central structure, which is globalist neoliberalism. This in turn is why our culture is falling apart, and most people are more interested in things like Love Island, football and getting drunk at the weekend than anything else. Now, of course, if a liberal was watching this video, and of course they wouldn't get this far if they were, the only thing they'd be able to say is this guy simply hates people from other parts of the world. But of course, such people have never been given a different paradigm other than the neoliberal one, so henceforth they don't understand themselves, their own culture, or even the best way for cultures to function in a peaceful, harmonious world. They've been trained to believe in inherent contradictions, such as all you need to do to fix the world is have tolerance, equality and love, and that means we'll have a pride march right through the Muslim part of town because Muslims love LGBTQ, right? These people believe if they throw off the traditions of their own culture, they'll create utopia, without realizing by doing that they'll create hell. So what are we to do about all of this? Well, the first thing for me is to come to some sort of peace in your inner life, whether that's a spiritual practice, getting into nature, whatever works for you in breeding peace in your heart, mind and soul. The world simply cannot dictate your emotions, otherwise it will ruin you. Secondly, the hardest one to accept for me personally is that England as we knew it has gone. However, in this pain, you realise something quite important. This is what started to change my mind. As I saw more and more people start to make out England and Britain was pure evil, the more you start to warm to it and think, why are people lying about it so much? Yeah, it's done its bad things, but it's done a lot of good as well. And I believe that can lead to a reawakening of our culture. A philosophical, economic, social and spiritual inquiry can grow and build us to a better future once more. It's much like the buildings you see in London, these old grand structures that these days are only used for some meaningless council meeting with a pride flag flying on top. We all know that there's a heart in there somewhere, something real in there somewhere, but it's just lost its way. And also, maybe speaking a bit of a romantic here, I do believe any new beginning allows us to have a sort of civilizational rebirth, which allows us to have a vision beyond money, materialism and immediate pleasure as the modern West has turned into, and something more consistent with our roots, which is rooted in beauty, spiritual inquiry and true growth and endeavour out into the world. Finally, I know it can seem impossible at times in the modern world, especially when many people lose hope, but I would reaffirm that all empires end. The American globalist empire will end too, and in between now and then we actually have time to decide what sort of thing we want to replace it with. These are just some of my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.